We're getting into the first bits of this big boss fight. I would assume this is going to be the primary one for this arc. We're going to probably see a little bit more of this battle before going over to some of the other characters. Because honestly, outside of Creed, we haven't seen like relatively anything from Under's or organization side of things. And we know that Yusai, I think is her name is pronounced, is a big deal. And then that one dude with the kind of Jotaro headpiece. I don't know what that's really called, that visor that kind of like goes in the hair. But I would assume that that's probably what people just refer to, the JoJo hat. But either way, this was a good match. Like in general, just seeing Andy kind of work around this, and it really shows the manga really showed the kind of like real flexibility of like a super regenerative character like Andy in this one. So, you know, there's been like a lot of characters like this in, like, especially like shonen, like a lot of the mainstream shonen. It's like looking at some of the characters recently when you look at someone like Dante, or in like Seven Since you look at like Bond. Anybody with like high speed regen who's like borderline unkillable through regular means. Like most of the time, it's just like to show how much damage they can take, and then just regen. Like anytime, like Bond, for instance, like him just getting splattered and stuff earlier on in the series to kind of show off his power, but also kind of like to show the power of like was like Diane would punch him and stuff, or anything like that. Whereas a lot of the time in Undead Unluck, it's more used for Andy to get out of scenarios or to kind of like weigh how he wants to take the approach towards like certain things. Like for instance, it was like way back with like the zombies and stuff, and he used the blood to kind of like zip all around them and cut them super fast. Whereas in this chapter, while he's like getting affected by one of Billy's abilities, he ends up just keeping the chunk that's affected by it and then like ripping off like the rest of his body. So he's just got like a full layer of skin stuck there. And like it's pretty spooky. Like it's cool at the same time just to kind of like think about how he's affecting this. One thing as just like a side note, because I didn't think about it for a minute, but it obviously like Andy naked, and like since chapter 1 it's had the big sensor bar. Is that layer of skin that's still there is like part of, like, is there like a layer of his dong just present like as a distraction? That's the most Chadley substitution jutsu I've ever seen. But from this, like he's doing a lot of work just kind of analyzing Billy and trying to figure out like his powers and stuff, and figure out like what powers and abilities he's using. So one thing this is just a guess, because Billy's abilities have to have a limitation. Like if he had the abilities to have everybody's powers, then nobody could stop him, and there would be 0 point in even really trying to go up against him because he'd be too strong. So I personally think that he has one. There's a like talking from Andy of like trying to figure out, okay, well, what's his, you know, what exactly is his power, and we see like his primary one. Like during the initial reading, it's like still under investigation. Like we see the ones that he's shown. He's got Andy's Undead. Like that one, I don't know why anyone would ever want to get rid of it. Unstoppable. Like that's just like both two ultimately useful ones. High speed and high speed regeneration. Unmoved for like CC, and he's able just to hold people in place for attacks, and then unbalance for, I guess, like more like general CC, but also like a disruption ability to mess with people. And then Unchanged, which he got from Gina. But the thing is that I'm curious about is if the 6 abilities, the 6 negator powers are specifically 6, is it because like he used the 6-shooter guns? Is like the number 6 like relevant to that, or is that just a coincidence? Because it would make sense if he could specifically have the 6 in there. Even in the chapter, the 6 are orientated kind of like rounds in the chamber of a revolver. But they're just doing like lots of really cool battle stuff. I really like seeing Andy, one, like right after like this thing, like the fight starts and Andy's like getting his katana from Eastwood. He goes and he just shoves his fingers right into Billy's eyes and just pierces them and just crushes them. Also, it seems that Billy's copied abilities they're just not as strong as the initial ones, at least from what I could tell. Or maybe like he has to set like certain ones are of equal strength, but maybe down the line like some aren't going to be as powerful, because he he's got his eyes still damaged throughout the chapter, so I would imagine he doesn't have nearly as like strong a regen as what Andy has. But he's just doing his thing. There's like doing unbalance, making like buildings and stuff collapse on Andy. That's not gonna really do anything. But again, he's being really smart because, like I said, it's the ones that he has that aren't just offensive, like something like unbalance. He's just using for stuff like CC, you know, environmental stuff. He pretty much cleared out the buildings in the area to make the flower petals come down, so they start converting Andy. Like one gets on his arm starts turning into a tree, in which he cuts it off and just kind of deals it that way. Cuts his hands off to kind of like spray blood all around, so they're not making direct contact. And he's Billy's saying that like, okay, well, it's gonna make them fall faster, but I mean, like, if they fall faster, but you don't have to worry nearly as much about the effect of them, because if they're covered in blood, they're not gonna get like full contact, at least from what Andy was like making out. So, but if it's just like at a higher pace, but like way less of effect, I'm sure that's a fair trade-off. But you have Billy using Unstoppable. He's like just pushing in around. I like seeing Andy with like this really cool new technique. He uses Dead Blade Claymore, but like the blade, like the primary blade, comes out of like his lower half, like his dismembered lower half, like right near his abs. Like, it looks really cool. I'm not gonna lie, that attack looked really cool. Like, he essentially made himself into a Beyblade on this one, and just chopped right through Billy's arm. And I'm curious because like Billy gets his arm back, but he doesn't get his eyes back. So I'm wondering like what exactly the rules and stipulations on having somebody else's ability is. And so on top of that, seeing like the blood spray, seeing the whole thing with his claymore attack, and then this one like high speed blood slash to crescent, or was it Great Deep Crescent Moon, is it really shows still the gap between Andy and Victor. Because like just think about like Victor, when Victor fought Uma Spoil, like he just shot some parts of him and they turned into copies of him, and he like was able to attack with those and himself. And on top of that, when he was fighting Andy in like his memories, and he used dead end attack, he like tore up a massive chunk of the city and was fine afterwards. Like Andy from his move like goes with the deep crimson, was it Great Deep Crimson Crescent attack, but he says that he's putting a lot of blood into it, and you see the attack like cut through like some buildings. It's going obviously really fast, and it's really powerful. I like how it looks in general. Like he's just got this big array of blood like size just kind of like carving through the ground, and they keep getting bigger. Like they're covering skyscrapers. Like the ones afterwards are way bigger than some of the like tallest buildings around. But like the thing obviously is he's like even saying like, oh man, I let out too much blood, and clearly he's a little bit worn from it. He looks relatively fine, but I don't think it's something he can replicate like immediately again. And like Victor could have done that with no problem, really, when you just look at like Dead End's capabilities. But when he goes to the attack, he's saying that he was like within his range, but that's when Billy reveals like the power he cells left, because one of the abilities that Andy took note of was the one that he was using to float. But he's like, well, I was going to use this as my ace in the hole. But it's not a floating power. He's got Unchanged. So he's got Gina's ability, and he's got like a full higher level of control over... I feel like over Unchanged, he's got to have a higher level of at least shown control. Like, if Gina was way more powerful in a later portion, like if we saw her like fully unhinged and going all out, I could see that. But I'm guessing Billy is going to show a higher end kind of just display than what we got from Gina. Maybe it'll have something to do with his powers again. Maybe his abilities work. It's like he has kind of like a different percentage he can have for each of the negator powers he takes. Like, what if it's like, okay, well, I can have these two be 100%, and these two are going to be 70%, these two are going to be 50%, and he can kind of like pick and choose which one goes where and like what percentage he's getting. I don't know, it's a weird power, so I'm just wanting to figure out like what exactly the variables in it are. But that's when Andy just goes and rips the chunk off, and he's like saying he's just going to get rid of the part that is set, because he's got unmove and unchange. So with unmove, it's everything that he's looking at. So obviously like everything that is stuck to where to where Billy's vision is, and he just has to kind of keep going and working. And again, it's also showing somebody who can work past an ability like that, where it is set on your vision and your line of sight. Whereas, like, he's right, if you can work your way around that, then you can pretty much GG somebody like Chikara. But obviously, like, the difference between Billy and Chikara is pretty much for support, whereas you have Billy pretty much using it as a CC ability. Like, the whole unmove CC trait is like the entirety of Chikara. He's not like a fighter, whereas like Billy is a fighter, and he's combining all these abilities on top of everything else. Billy's actually been a really cool antagonist so far. I've liked him a lot. I really want to get to more information of him and then see more of like his just fights and like battles that he's going to display. Get his motivation and everything. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Thumbs up the video, befriend the like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But than that, I appreciate everybody's already subscribed, and I thank you all for listening. Bye.